today's subject is using research to improve the delivery and effectiveness of change programs. So the key is the research. The next speaker, Jim Dale, we're going to flick across to his screen and he'll be able to introduce himself. But suffice to say that Jim is ProgM secretary, and we go back some time. We were joint police officers together within Sussex Police. I know you're going to enjoy what Jim's got to tell you.
Right, good afternoon everyone. My name's Jim Dale. I'm really the warm-up act for Rod Willis, and Martin's presentation will dovetail really nicely. But my proposition is twofold. Firstly, we are not effectively applying evidence-based research when delivering major change. And my second proposition is that some of the doctrine, I don't call it research, that currently exists about change management has no evidential base and is positively unhelpful. Now, I'm a fellow of the CIPD. The CIPD is a Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, and every year they send out an annual survey, and one of the questions relates to the pace of change. And I've noted after the last 15 years that I've been completing this survey is that the pace of change is increasing, and this is a comment that was published very recently following the last survey. And we're talking about this unrelenting pace driven particularly in the public sector by austerity and in the private sector by competition. Okay, but a few words of introduction about me. This is me now, and I am a registered project professional. I'm the only ex-police officer that belongs to the Major Projects Authority as a high-risk gateway review team leader, which I'm very proud of. The Gateway Review Scheme is great. It's about 13, 14 years old, and it operates a peer review system of major projects within government. I think Winston Churchill said it's far better to learn from the misfortunes of others than your own. So this has been a rich source of learning. I went to Cass Business School. I'm currently studying for a professional doctorate at the University of Portsmouth. And this was me in a former life. I was in the Metropolitan Police and Sussex Police. But look how happier I am since I've retired. And I was the former head of operations for Sussex Police and involved in a number of programs and projects as well. So I guess my research has been driven by experiences that I've had, some successful, others not very successful, in attempting to deliver change within and outside of policing. But let's make sure we're talking about the same things. If we use the MSP, Managing Successful Programs, I know many of you will be familiar with this, but this talks about a program as being a temporary, flexible organisation that oversees a number of related projects to deliver outcomes and benefits related to the organisation's strategic objectives. So it's delivering pretty major change. And then if we look at the 6th edition of the BOK, we can see this model here, which is, we can call this the planned paradigm of change. And it really dates back to Kurt Lewin, who used a different model, but he talked about unfreezing, moving, and refreezing the organisation. But remember, that model from Kurt Lewin was developed in 1948, just after the Second World War. Now this is a definition that the APM use. Now rather bizarrely, you'll see that the definition of change management sits next to configuration management and requirements management under scope management. And this is a model of change that the APM currently propose. And you can see there you've got the planned paradigm of change, i.e. that you can plan something, you deliver it, and then in some way you consolidate or sustain. This is a quote, and we shouldn't be surprised at the difficulty of delivering change. It was ever thus, and this guy Gaius Patronus Arbiter wrote this in the 1st century AD. Moving on, 1400 years, Niccolo Machiavelli, an extract from The Prince, and he talks about the challenge of delivering change. So the question I ask is, why, given that we know that change is an every part feature of our lives, why is it we are not delivering change successfully in our organisations? And perhaps the most alarming of all the statistics comes from the Office of Government of Commerce, which is now the Major Projects Authority. And I'll let you read that. Now, I've been involved in a number of gateway reviews, peer reviews. I've seen several programmes, multi-million-pound programmes, where no benefits have been defined. So if we take that into account and the 80% here, that's a frightening statistic. Now, the OGC, now the Major Projects Authority, highlight as one of the 11 gateway lessons, and this is a product now of in excess of 5,000 reviews, that inattention or the lack of attention to change management is one of the common reasons for project failure and programme failure. And this is a quote from the Change Management Institute. They're a new body in the UK, were formed over in Australia and now gaining traction. A quick mention about my own research. I'm looking at developing best practice for collaborative research, or collaborative alliances, should I say, or collaborative change programs. And as part of that research, of course, I need to review change within single organisations. I'm currently undertaking semi-structured interviews. There's a self-completed questionnaire I'll come on to very shortly, and finally there's some action-orientated research. And the purpose of the triangle is to triangulate the research, to validate the research. Okay, these are some of the things that people have said to me. Success and failure, well, that's a really difficult question to answer, Jim, because that's not absolute. Somebody said to me, I'd rather not use the term failure, but our programs achieve a sub-optimal outcome. Thought that was very nice. This is what someone else said, all our projects are doomed to succeed, but we can implement new systems, but nothing changes. I'm struggling to think of a successful change management program. This was somebody who's very senior in an organisation with more than 30 years experience. Scary. Even the most successful initiatives contain huge areas for improvement. And given our track record, our employees have every right to be sceptical and suspicious. That, again, was from a very senior manager. So why is this? And this is really a quick snapshot of where I am in research which is still very much ongoing. But what I've identified is poor research. The question I ask is, where is the evidential base? And surprisingly, many frameworks and theories that are currently being used have no evidential base. Secondly, there's outdated research. We still very much rely on the magnificent work of Kurt Lewin, but that was developed in 1948 in a very different age. And the notion that the planned paradigm of change is the only way, I think, needs to be challenged. What I found incredible is actually knowledge amongst our own community is very sketchy. There's no common agreement on what works and what doesn't work. Too many managers subconsciously subscribe to Morgan. This is Gareth Morgan, wrote a brilliant book, Images of an Organisation. He has 8 metaphors to depict different types of change. But one of those metaphors is of an organisation structured as a machine, with the chief executive as the chief engineer. The chief executive pulls a lever, and at the bottom of the organisation something changes. Real-life pressures often result in good theory and practice being jettisoned. I call this the hypocrisy of change management, knowing what to do but not doing it. I kind of, it's not talking the talk, but not walking the talk. Okay, folklore and current thinking. I know Rod's going to develop this, needs to be challenged. Is change always resisted? I don't think it is. And then we use language, which I think is wholly inappropriate. We talk about strategies to overcome resistance, and we apply then Lewin's force field analysis. Language is important. Language impacts on behaviour. And then finally, managers continually underestimate the time and costs. You know, this notion that change can be cost neutral. There is always a cost when delivering organisational change. There's some references for those of you that like this, that wish to read up. I know Rod's going to do the same. And finally, it's my time to conclude, and it's to hand on to Rod. Now, Rod and I met up when I was undertaking my research. Most people run away when I'm talking about a one-to-one semi-structured interview, but Rod actually volunteered. Rod is passionate about reflective practice, and I confess I am too. He's the managing director of his own company, a Centaur. He studied change through Henley Business School. He's undertaken research, which he's very kindly shared with me, and I think he's very enlightening. And I think the more we use this type of research, the more we will increase our success rate in organisations for delivering change. So I'm really looking forward to hearing Rod, and thanks for listening to me.
Okay, good afternoon, folks. Jim's done a great job at setting the stage for what I'd like to share with you now. My background is electronics manufacturing engineering, so have developed in a clearly rational space. Then moved into process control through the era of TQM when that was heavily being deployed in the corporate space. Mid-2000s, started to realize after many M&As, so mergers and acquisitions, life didn't seem to go as we would like it to. We would sort of define the process, define what should happen, get the plan going, and there's always something popping up that seemed to be a bit confusing in terms of we didn't achieve the end objective. I started then doing some work at Henley Business School, study at Henley Business School, and ultimately I decided to research resistance to change from a leader's perspective. I chose that point because we often seem to be pointing the finger at others as to why we weren't successfully changing. And I'm thinking, well, actually, what about the leadership? What does the leadership really perceive? Has it actually ever thought about that question? We're all very busy. Taking time out to think and reflect can be quite challenging. And through my study at Henley Business School, I started to personally reap the rewards of pausing and considering what was going on. So I'll move straight on now into the presentation, and what this is about sharing really the high-level findings of the research. If anyone would like to know more details after, my contact details will be available through the APM, but I want to really give you a flavour of what came out from that research. It took 6 months to go through, by the way. Where did I start? Well, I've got a number of 70%, Jim had 60, we've seen 80, of change initiatives fail. My particular number came from Harvard Business Review. I've been involved in many LinkedIn blogs where people debate, was it 60, was it 70, was it 80, was it less? My personal view was, it's just too high. It's amazing how we can get stuck into debating the numbers. It was great to see that the majority of you felt that it was certainly greater than 60. So I think we've all got the same sense that, you know, some things are amiss and what can we do about it. Interesting enough, there's various research that I looked at as part of my project where what we identified from other people's research was resistance to change is often cited as the #1 reason why change programs do not deliver what's expected. And I sort of had an uneasy feeling about that. I mean, that's what data was showing us, or the research was showing us. But my instinct was, well, it's very easy to point the finger at someone else. I wonder if we are, as organizations and as leaders and as change practitioners, maybe falling foul of that ourselves, not taking that time out to understand what's going on. We've already heard that we're running in a much more turbulent time. Transitions are happening at a much more faster pace. And often we have the other reality, needing to achieve more with less. I mean, that's true, I think, in every sector that we can imagine at this moment in time. So we've got a real challenge on our hands. We've got a track record of not changing particularly well. It's about time we try to address this. Otherwise, all we're going to do is make our lives really problematic as we go further forward. So prime research, where did my research go after? I decided I wanted to go across sector, and I didn't want to be restricted in one organization. So I effectively interviewed in a qualitative interview structure 16 leaders, both past and present. So some had retired, a couple of them had retired, but a vast number of years of experience of major change programs. And several were still very active in the city in a position of CEO in fairly large organizations, be that major consultancy or major financial institutions. Between the 16 folk, they represented 55 organizations, of which they had experienced multiple major transitions. The sectors, oil, gas, professional, financial, public sector, interestingly worked with a district council that had merged. That was a very interesting case, where bringing two district councils together, and what did that mean? As well as, interesting enough, it turns out I inadvertently had been working with one of Jim's long-term colleagues, which was a real surprise for us to discover. And so, therefore, there was direct police collaboration program input into this research as well. The problem of change, again, this is as I was doing my digging and trying to work out where to focus my research. Change is occurring at an increasing pace, okay? But people fear change because it upsets the way of doing things and threatens their security. This feeling is balanced by the desire of new experience. This was a quote back in 1966 from an industrial magazine in the States. What concerns me about such statements is I think that represented accurately our understanding at that point in time, but I also have a sense it may have set the frame for, oh, that's what's really going on in life, rather than is something more complex occurring as we go through major change programs. I asked actually only 7 questions. Each interview took over 90 minutes. It's amazing when you just ask an open question what starts to flow, and I have to thank all my interviewees because they were very generous in their time and sharing their rich experience. But I wanted to share with you a flavor of the types of questions that I asked so that you can get a sense of why that may have stimulated such a rich response from them. One would be, when you think of the term resistance to change, what comes to mind? At that point, I would just keep quiet. And then often the person opposite would consider a little bit, and then they'd go off for 15, 20 minutes. Some said, well, actually, you know what, people are always resistant. Others would respond by saying, I'm not sure I accept the term. How can we discuss that in a meaningful way? So very interesting. So the stereotype of yes, people are, versus I don't buy that statement. How can we engage in it? Also try to introduce the time context. Is this something that you used to use but now you don't anymore? Is it something that you, through an experience, have evolved to a different understanding? That also then led into the third item here. I've only shared 3 of the framing questions. As you think of examples of resistance to change, do you perceive it as only negative, positive, both positive and negative, or neither? So what do we find? 4 months later, 518 themes, loads of post-it notes everywhere. What actually unfolded were 17 symptoms of resistance to change. I use the word symptoms deliberately because for those that don't buy the word, resistance is a symptom, hence the terminology I've used here. Now, those 17 symptoms were able to be grouped into 3 general areas, which are represented by these 3 boxes. Before I go into those in more detail, I'd like to share with you the text at the bottom. There's a term that I became familiar with during the research, and it's a term called psychological levels. And you can look at life, the way we engage in the world ourselves or with other people, in terms of the environment you're in, the behaviors that you see, the capability that you have or the other person has, values and beliefs, sense of identity, and actually a personal purpose. So what I've done is I've grouped them in terms of level 1 and level 2 with those other words matching those categorizations. So if for the moment we go and look at the culture of the organization, which is under ensuring a safe environment to enable learning and change, what we find is we had one symptom that was at level 1, so that's the environment, behavior, and capability. We had 3 at the values and beliefs, sense of identity, and personal purpose. We then come to the next box. We're now looking at leading and managing change. I would suggest that's what traditionally is captured by project management training. So certified programs will be focusing in this area, and they do a grand job, but they focus particularly in this area. And what you see here is often the items that came up had to do with purpose of the change program and how it did or did not align with the organizational purpose, assuming both were clearly known. The communications throughout the change program, understanding that there's a propagation delay when you start to communicate. And here we're referring to the difference between communicating and broadcasting. Quite a lot of depth behind the comms side. We often hear it paraphrased, we must communicate more. My personal view is that statement isn't very helpful, because if you don't know what communication really is and all of its facets, you'll just do more of what you're already doing. That may not be adequate. And then the change dynamic. Probably many of you have heard of a thing called the tipping point. We tend to have people who are early adopters, other people who are waiting and seeing, and other people who will actually predominantly just say, why would we change? I think we're okay now. So you have the change dynamic, which can be mapped out using many models, both in and outside of the world of project management. But interestingly, again, we have 3 symptoms at level 2, 2 symptoms at level 1. Last box, we have individual and group transition. I'll explain what the word transition means later on. We'll all have our own definition, but there's a definition I'd like to share specifically with you in a second. What we have in here is personal dynamics and group dynamics. So the dynamics within a group, so people in a group inside that entity. But then you have between groups, sales to marketing, sales to production. Then you have the personal dynamic, the individual themselves experiencing change, and how that may or may not impact positively or otherwise going on in their family and their social life. Because at the end of the day, the whole person turns up at work. There's a lovely saying that probably most people have heard of, leave your feelings at home. There's a problem with that. You can't. All you do is suppress them. And if, for example, a change program is going to put at risk your mortgage, it's going to be very difficult to be upbeat about the current change. So just to make an extreme point. So where I got to in thinking is, well, actually, I wonder if there's a relationship between leaders and managers' ability to work at a deeper psychological level, so that's level 2, and be that consciously or otherwise, and the actual ability to bring about successful change. The point here is we probably all come across 1 or 2, maybe more, change practitioners who are brilliant at what they do, and they just seem to do the right stuff. But what is the right stuff? It seems that some people intuitively tune in to the level 2 area without even necessarily knowing, and then there are others that consciously know this. For me, this seems to be the best kept secret out, which hence why I've put this in the public domain, because I find it very frustrating that practitioners on this call don't necessarily have access to this space, and therefore my desire is to try and share where I can. Okay, here's a completely different approach to try and make the point. The diagram, or the head, has a ladder. Don't worry about reading the words. You'll be able to look at that later on in the webinar if you wish, as well as a copy of the slides will be available through SlideShare through APM. But there is a thing called the reflexive loop. Who captured this? We've had Kurt Lewin referenced already today. Well, shortly after Kurt Lewin, there was a chap called Chris Argyris, and then later Peter Senge, who some of you may have heard of. This basically is indicating there's data in this world that we have the ability to observe, but in reality, every one of us filters it based on our own personal upbringing and on the cultural norm that we're operating in, and potentially the norm of the corporate culture that we're operating in. And that dictates what we look at, what we think is important. So there's a filter going on as to what we observe, and then there's another parameter going on. What are we skilled and consciously able to engage in? I would suggest that everyone on this call has, at one level or other, had training that allows them to understand environmental challenges, behavioral and capability challenges, the classic competency frameworks. And that gives us a certain field of view. But what about this level, the values and beliefs and identity and personal purpose? And when we engage in a change program, this stuff's going on, like it or not. So now the question is, how do you take it into account? I've come from a fairly tough-nosed, high-tech engineering background. This used to be referred to as the pink fluffy stuff. What can I suggest? We might choose to frame it that way, but it's the stuff that often I think is getting in the way of major change programs. So somehow we need to find a way of engaging it in a sensible and scalable manner. Bottom line, how will we gain access to this knowledge on a broader basis? When Jim and Merv contacted me, I had no hesitation of wanting to contribute because I see this as one vehicle as trying to get out there greater understanding that there's more going on than we are aware of. We've probably all heard the term, we don't know what we don't know. I believe that's what's going on at this moment in time in the change space, which is why we have such a high failure rate. High failure rates greater than 60 have been reported for the past 60 years. So I would suggest that somehow we're missing the point if it's taken us 60 years not to make any impact. I include myself in that mix, clearly. So where did this get me to? What are the implications if you or your leaders and managers are not able to work at a deeper level than capability? It would seem that the majority of change programs fail to deliver what is wanted. What I try to do is, it's all well and good doing research, and for those of you who've engaged in it or even not, it's very easy for it to say, well, lovely bit of theory, but what can I do with it? What I wanted to do was to then take the findings of the research and then try and find a very practical way of how we could use the insights from here to apply against any project management. So I do not promote a particular methodology. There are many out there, and they've taken years and lots of experience to build up. But what I am starting to promote is the use of what I call the grow through change lens, which is what's represented here. So having finished the research, I took time out to say, well, okay, what's really going on? What are we capturing? And developed this framework and then said, well, let's now try and map those 17 symptoms of resistance to change to this framework to see, does the framework allow me to capture all of these symptoms? And the answer is it does. And I've sort of taken some of the symptoms and put them into a more readable format. A classic one, by the way, lack of clear purpose. And purpose at several levels. Purpose of the organization, was that understood? Of the change initiative, was that understood and did it align? Of the group the person belongs to within the organization, because a group will often, well, will have its own purpose, is it aligned? And then actually the purpose of the individual, if they were aware of it. Same thing coming on with leadership. There seemed to be generally a low awareness regarding leadership of transformation and individual transition. The word transition, right at the bottom of the slide, I've given you a definition, 16th century. It's basically moving from one state or condition to another. Now here's the thought. If our training is only covering capability, behaviors, and environment, that's how we will frame transition. If your training includes, or your awareness includes, the understanding that values and beliefs is actually a key part of it, then your transition program project will inherently include things to try and address, values and belief alignment. But if you don't know it's there and giving you grief, you're not going to include it. So you're going to get sidewinded, basically. Coming down, under communication, so appropriate process, timing, and content. A classic is leadership teams spent many months working out what they want to do. They know what they want to do. They communicate, otherwise known as broadcast, what's going to happen. And everyone else is trying to assimilate what does that mean, with the leadership team just eager to get on with it. So one needs to build in a communication, two-way communication methodology, which allows people to assimilate the change and understand what it means for them, the group they belong to, the organization, again, linking back to purpose. Coming on the right-hand side, change diet, staff involvement. We often hear that. Tipping point fits in. Assimilation capacity, intriguing. One of the interviewees had worked with a large corporate retailer, and they had got so many change programs going on that the frontline staff didn't know how to deal with it. The volume was too great, and the organization had to pull back. people were not resisting. They were perceived to be resisting, but actually all they were maxed out in terms of their capacity to take in so many different things. I won't read the whole lot out. These will be available to you through SlideShare and the recorded video, but just have a look at some of these points and see if any of these resonate for you later on. One point I want to highlight, probably the most fundamental one, you'll obviously hear the word trust pops up quite a lot. If people can't trust something, they therefore have the unknown, they therefore have to fear. We have a natural instinct to protect ourselves if you have a level of fear. So trust and fear are so fundamental throughout. So if you wanted to have sort of one or two things to take away from this call, focus on trust and fear. And a way you could actually get to that is through a particular theory called self-determination theory. There's a much more comfortable, you can do that either the hard academic way or you can engage with it through a video, which I can provide details with later on, but it's called Drive, and it's on the RCA website, Royal Society of Arts. Right, what next? So what I've done is I've actually modeled my entire business around the Grow Through Change framework. I do a lot of coaching and what's called professional supervision. I use this framework as my own lens. I've modified it slightly. Feel free to play with it if you wish. I'm not going to be precious about its use because I want people to use it if it helps them. But it's not a methodology. It's just a way of, if you're doing something, pay attention. Have you taken into account all these domains? What I'm looking to do next is I'm trying to find future funding for additional research. There's some areas I'd like to explore at both a business and a personal level. We've also got workshops that we run, and then I mentioned the supervision. But one of the things I wanted to do, and actually it was talking with Merv and Jim that stimulated this, how does this map to the body of knowledge? Very pleased to see in the body of knowledge we've got people, which is always a good start, and in there we've got many items that are listed. And actually, if you read the body of knowledge, you start to find it's recommending additional reading, and it's starting to shift into the domain of values and beliefs. It may not be immediately obvious, but what it's doing is introducing things such as transaction analysis, as this might be interesting. So the authors and contributors to the body of knowledge, I think, are actually heading in exactly the same direction, which is a delight to see. I also, for those of you that may know ISO 9001, quality management system, of which there have been very good and also some questionable deployments, ISO 9004 is about sustained organization. I've mapped both of the body of knowledge and the ISO 9004 to this framework. And what's really interesting, if you were to draw a line along the center, the majority of resistance to change symptoms occur in the bottom half. The majority of the insight and guidance provided by 9004 and the body of knowledge, guess what, is in the top half. So there is still a misalignment between the problems that we have and where we're focusing. Doesn't mean to say we should stop focusing here, but we need to extend our focus in the lower area. We mentioned CIPD via Jim already. I won't repeat that, but each year there seems to be a new report claiming that identifying there's a problem with our knowing and doing gap or the capability gap. That's from the CIPD. Book references for you to gain access to. So these are practitioner. I've gone for practitioner work here rather than academic. And this is what I'd recommend you go and have a look at if you're interested in any of those domains. Finally, some references that I used right at the beginning. These are academic references. These, I would say, are the ones that have had a profound impact on my own practice. And to close, good old Einstein. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. 60 years we haven't cracked this one. I think it's about time we gave it a good shot. That's it. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thanks ever so much, Rod. That was absolutely brilliant, and it leads on very nicely from Jim. For our final session, and I think we are just about on time, we're going to move over to Martin, and Martin is going to tell us the work that he's been doing with regard to the embryonic or formative change sig. I'll give you a moment just to take a rest, Rod, and I'll put a question to Jim. So while we're waiting for Martin. So I guess, Jim, one of the questions that we've got is, so are we actually doomed in terms of this kind of people stuff that we've heard about? Maybe that's a question both for Jim and for Rod in terms of, this 60% failure rate?
Yeah, I think doomed, well, certainly from history, and Rod's restated the fact the success rate doesn't appear to be getting any better. And if you look at the last piece of research I referred to, was the Institute of Directors, and they said that 80% of major change programs were abandoned after 2 years. Now, in terms of how we move forward, I think we need a far better awareness of the challenges involved in delivering change, and I think we can improve. I think we've got the hard skills of project delivery. We've come on leaps and bounds in the last 40 years, but I think now's the time to focus and to concentrate on those softer skills. And if we can do that, then we can improve our success rate. But just one final point there is success or failure isn't absolute, it's on a continuum. And even successful programs of change have considerable scope for improvement.
Okay, thanks very much, Jim. Rod, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great one. I'm quite, believe it or not, I'm quite upbeat. I'm upbeat if we pay attention to we need to do something differently. If we think we'll carry on doing the same thing and get different output, again, Einstein's quote, then we're fooling ourselves. As I look at the very structured, rational, created frameworks that are out there, I think they're extremely robust. I'm with Jim. I think we've got that pretty well nailed. The question now is how to develop the skill set for people. My first thought was, let's send everyone on a psychology degree. Don't think that's going to happen somehow. So how can you now create an environment where people can learn the basics about their own personality, their own behaviors and relationships? It's actually not that complicated to share that knowledge at a basic level. Now, I don't want to promote my other services, but the point is there are several people who can help us. So I think it's a 2 to 4 day task to get a group of people into a more informed place, which they can immediately enrich their current understanding of project management. I say there are many ways that you can engage in that, but I'm upbeat. It's doable.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Rod. Another question, perhaps a little bit of a challenge for Jim in this one. So why do we actually waste so much money on knowledge-based qualifications if all this applies?
I think that's a very astute point, actually. I'm not sure it's wasting money, but it's knowledge-based qualifications plus the ability to apply that knowledge in an appropriate way.
Okay. Rod, did you want to come back on that one, or we've probably got time for a couple more questions?
I don't think you can ever have too much knowledge. The question is, do you have knowledge in the domain or across domains, could I suggest, that is helping you achieve the task that you have in front of you? I've recently been to 2 conferences. One was, believe it or not, about therapists and counsellors, and the next was about system thinkers. They both thought they had the edge on what systems thinking was. They both saw different views, but by the way, they were both right. So I think it's, don't get fooled into, Deming had a great thing. He had a thing called System of Profound Knowledge, and one of the parameters was, get a sense of what the theory of knowledge is. Knowledge is not all-knowing. It's evolving. So learning stuff is great, but don't get trapped into thinking that everything you've learned represents the only answer. Keep an open mind.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Another one, we talk a lot about the project management profession. Is there such a thing as the change management profession?
I think there certainly should be. The CIPD see that change management sits within their space. They would argue that HR is at the forefront of organisational change. We have the new Change Management Institute. There are a number of bodies that offer qualifications. The APM group is one, and that's a nice prompt for Martin's presentation, which I'm very happily give a very quick overview, which is there's a movement within our own organisation to capture some of this and develop some of the corpus of knowledge within the APM, and this is the current movement behind the creation of a change SIG note the word change as opposed to change management. Change being all-encompassing and also embracing self-directed change. I don't know if you want to add to that quickly, Rod.
Yeah, I buy that. The one bit that concerns me, though, is if you look at some of the CIPD reports about how people looking upwards, one level upwards at their immediate manager, how they often think they don't have the skill set to do what's necessary, which is a bit of a damning thing for the UK business. I believe there's an underlying, it's almost like a foundation understanding about people, behaviors and relationships that I think anyone in a management or supervisory role should have. And then you've got the deeper dive combined and integrated with the change space. If we focus on a profession for change, we then ignore potentially, I don't know what the numbers would be, say 80% of all the other managers out there who aren't focusing on change. And I think that will create a nightmare. Turning on his head, though, I do think change practitioners can be a fantastic way of getting that knowledge out into the organizations, because by definition, they're at the coalface. And if they can share as part of their activity some of that learning with the people around them, then I think that could be an extremely productive way of getting the word spread out further.
That's absolutely brilliant, and we've got a huge number of questions and contributions that have come in. Unfortunately, we don't have time for them. I know that Jim is going to essentially say a couple of words about the change sig, because unfortunately we had technical problems and lost Martin. So, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real shame we've not been able to hear from Martin. Martin Taylor has been the main driving force behind creating a change sig. And I know many of you would have participated in a survey that was circulated. Now, the results of that survey Martin wanted to discuss, and we will upload those slides onto SlideShare, so you will get the opportunity to see that. But unsurprisingly, there was significant, overwhelming support for a change sig. There is a Discovery Day. This is yet another event which Martin has been instrumental in organising, which is on the 7th of November. I'm not sure whether there are any more places there, but it's certainly been very popular. But you can find that if you're a member of the APM, or even if you aren't, through APM events. But really, to suffice and to summarise, is that there is a movement driven by Martin and others. I'm involved in this, supported by the other SIGs, to create this additional cross-cutting SIG within the APM, not only to develop but also to share and disseminate knowledge relating to those softer issues of change management.